So I think it's all there, actually. And as I said, more than 50 years ago. So it's stunning to me that we had this kind of insight and prescience, and yet it didn't get picked up for whatever reasons. Now, the Sand County Almanac is a very famous book. It's still in print. It sells tens of thousands of copies a year, so it's a good bet for the publisher. But this land ethic hasn't really made its way into the mainstream discussion of philosophy. I'm not really sure why. It could be that Leopold was trained as a wildlife manager, and so he doesn't exactly speak the words of philosophy. It could be his very laconic writing style, which is, as you saw, quite brief and succinct, doesn't really expound the way philosophers do. But for whatever reason, we had these brilliant ideas 3/4 of a century ago, and they didn't really catch on. So I wanted to bring that to your attention, hopefully encourage you to go out and get a copy of the Sand County Almanac if you don't have one already, and read it. I also wanted to point out that Leopold's ideas came in part from this close observation of and relation with a particular place. And I think that is very important as we contemplate our human role in the world. That we need to think on a very grand scale of the universe story. We need to think through cosmological time. But we live in a particular place. We can only live in one place at a time, as we are embodied beings right now. In the future, who knows? But right now, we inhabit specific places. And I think that Leopold can show us, has shown us, how close observation and really deeply inhabiting that place, learning from it, working with it, can lead to new insights and also lead to restorative possibilities for humans and places. So then, half a dozen years later, after Leopold's book was published in 1949, Lynn White Jr.'s article came out, which you read. It was published in CIIS, the leading journal of scientific study. And Lynn White was a historian at UCLA who argued that, as I said, Christianity was the cause of the environmental crisis, which by now, this is maybe 30 years after Leopold's work, is seeming more pressing even. So not only have we experienced the Dust Bowl, but people are starting to be concerned about air pollution and water pollution, and the endangered species that Leopold had mentioned back in the 30s. There are more species facing extinction. So Lynn White Jr. thinks that Christianity has created a particular worldview that has allowed people to exert dominion over the rest of the world and cause a lot of devastation. So he thought maybe we should abandon Christianity. Maybe we should abandon the Western roots. And he suggested that we could look to Eastern cultures, which he thought might be more in harmony with the natural world. He advocated Zen. And then he, at the same time, realized that we couldn't adopt another religion wholesale, just paste it on top of our culture. So that might not work, but maybe there were aspects of it that could be incorporated into Western culture. But people have critiqued White in the years since, saying that he didn't represent Christianity properly. In half a dozen pages, it's hard to represent a tradition as vast and multifaceted as Christianity. People have said that he misinterpreted the history, or that the factors that he identified were not the important factors in shaping the Western attitude towards nature. But the important thing about the White article is that it launched this whole field of religion and ecology. Even though Leopold was talking about it earlier, I don't think that the debate really got going until the White article, which was very controversial. And a little aside, if you want to make your name, write something very controversial. It doesn't even have to be correct, as long as it starts a debate, which I would say is the case of White's, and one of the highly, highly cited articles. So that's just a little tip. In fact, yeah, I was noting that in the sciences, if you're mistaken, you actually get ostracized because someone tries to repeat your experiment and they see you didn't do it very well, and they just say, okay, this person's not a good scientist, they're not going to get grants, and so on. But in the humanities and social sciences, if you make a mistake, then you just start a controversy, and you actually get cited more. So the White's article really launched this debate, got people to re-examine the Christian tradition, and I would say that most people ultimately ended up opposing White and saying that he made mistakes in various areas. But it launched an effort towards retrieval, reinterpretation, and reconstruction of the Christian tradition. So people who were finding that the Christian tradition wasn't amenable to the rising consciousness of the 60s, to environmental consciousness or feminist consciousness, started to look for ways to retrieve less dominant streams within the biblical tradition that might provide more support or more inspiration for the new kinds of thinking that we're developing. They tried to reinterpret or worked on reinterpreting some of the passages that had been deemed to be problematic or just maybe interpreted incorrectly, including the idea of dominion. There are many interpretations of that. And started reconstructing narratives that would be that would promote a more mutually flourishing relationship between humans and the natural world. So these trends, in particularly, I would say, in feminist theology that was getting going at the same time, started to lead towards the field of religion and ecology. But it wasn't really until the 1990s that it got going. And what happened in the early 90s, or in the late 90s actually, was that a series of conferences was convened at the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions by Mary Evelyn Tucker, who Robert just mentioned, and her husband John Grimm. They're both scholars of the history of religion. And so they held a series of 10 conferences that explored major world traditions and ecology. So there was Christianity and ecology, Buddhism and ecology, Jainism and ecology, Shinto and ecology, Islam and ecology, Judaism and ecology, so on. And they brought together, and this was the first time this had ever been done, where people had said, what are the resources within your religious tradition for understanding the human-natural world relationship? They brought together scholars, practitioners, leading thinkers to explore these issues. Out of these conferences came a series of 10 volumes of essays exploring this, and suddenly we have a resource that looks at the connection of the world's religions with ecology. So these conferences that were held in the late 90s finally jump-started the academic study of religion and ecology. Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm established the Forum on Religion and Ecology, which is now housed at Yale. And there at Yale, there's also a joint master's degree where students can get a master's in environmental management and a master's in religion from the divinity school. So they can study religion and environmental studies together, which is what I did, but that was before Mary Evelyn and John were there, so I didn't have the benefit of their guidance. So the American Academy of Religion has recognized religion and ecology as a field of study now. There's a religion and ecology group within the American Academy of Religion. There's also become quite a strong force, activist force, in religion and ecology. So, for example, the National Religious Partnership for the Environment, which got started in the early 1990s, is a collaboration of the mainstream Christian traditions along with Jewish leaders to look at the resources within those traditions and promote activism in congregational bodies that promotes care for the earth. Similarly, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF, held a meeting in Assisi, Italy in 1986 that led to the founding of the International Alliance for Religions and Conservation, which is based in the UK. And what the National Religious Partnership for the Environment does on a US scale, the Alliance for Religions and Conservation does on an international scale. That is, help people within religious traditions identify the resources in their tradition for improving the human-earth relationship and help develop projects that enact that relationship. So the Alliance for Religions and Conservation works with many different groups, particularly in Asia and Africa, helping religious groups enact their values in relation to the natural environment. And then in 2000, another sign that this field had really come into its own was when the Yale School of Forestry and the Yale Divinity School, together with the Wilderness Society and the National Religious Partnership for the Environment, hosted a conference called The Good in Nature and Humanity that looked at how two of the most imperiling crises of our time, the global environmental destruction and an impoverished spirituality, they said how those were related and how they could share resources to, again, strengthen and re-envision the human-nature relationship. That conference resulted in a book that's called The Good in Nature and Humanity that we read in my class last spring. And I mention that because I think when one of the oldest universities in the US gets on board with a developing field, then you see that it's starting to really have legs, it's starting to really get recognized. But again, 2000, that was 75 years or 70 years after Leopold had said these things in a very condensed form. By 2008, the Society for Conservation Biology had established a religion and conservation biology working group. So now here's scientists jumping on board, again, recognizing the potential value of religion to help build their efforts to conserve wild species.